Gap theory. This is the view that was put forth in the early 19th century when the first evidences for a very ancient Earth began to be published in Europe. For instance, a Scottish scholar named Playfair published evidences for the antiquity of the world, and the great Scottish theologian, his name just slipped out of my head, Church in Edinburgh. Let's see, what was that fellow's name? Thomas Chalmers, yes, okay. The great Scottish theologian Thomas Chalmers read Playfair and thought, well, here's a way to solve the puzzle. What if there is a time gap between Genesis 1 verse 1 and Genesis 1 verse 2? In 1814, Thomas Chalmers published that opinion, and it was immediately snatched up by a number of Christian writers in Europe and in America. It became called the gap theory. And so the notion is that between verse 1 and verse 2 we can insert, well, let's see, billions of years, and then we translate the next verse this way: now the earth became formless and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep. And so some who held this view, not Chalmers, but some who held this view said, that was the time when Satan ruled the world. So he ruled the world and destroyed it. So Genesis 1 verse 2 and following is a recreation story, not a creation story. That's the view that's put forth in the Schofield Reference Bible. Does anyone have a Schofield Reference Bible somewhere in your house? I guess they're not quite as popular as they used to be. They were very popular for a while. The Schofield Reference Bible, published around 1909, advocated the gap theory, and with the notion that Satan was the ruler of the world for millions of years, destroying it. And so Genesis 1 verse 2 begins a story of recreation. So that's something about the gap theory. Skip on to the next slide. Okay, and the next slide as well. I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's all right. My time is slipping away fast. Oh my. Okay, a couple of things in support of the gap theory. It was an honest and orthodox attempt to respond to the new scientific information of the early 1900s, early 19th century, pardon me. And so it did seem to resolve the tensions between Scripture and this newly forming science of geology. So Chalmers, by the way, not only was a theologian and pastor and the developer of diaconate ministries in Scotland, he was also a professor of mathematics for a while and lectured on scientific topics at one of the universities. He had 7 different appointments proposed to him in various universities before he finally accepted one. He was a polymath, a man of many talents. But it did seem to resolve the tensions between Scripture and the new science of geology. What about Kant? Let's go there to the next slide. If we hold the gap theory, however, the Bible then has no compelling story of Earth's ultimate origin. Doesn't Genesis 1 seem to need to be a story of Earth's ultimate origin? So this is one of the reasons why most scholars have rejected the gap theory. And some scholars actually read Genesis 1 verses 1 through 3 as a single sentence. That interpretation goes back to the medieval rabbis. 1 through 3 is all a single sentence, said some of the rabbis. And in Psalm 33, a psalm that reflects chapter 1 of Genesis, the Lord spoke, and they stood forth. There's a creation report there, which is not recreation, but creation out of nothing. He spoke, and the world stood forth, says Psalm 33. That seems to require a creation understanding of Genesis 1, not a recreation understanding of Genesis 1. And is Satan really the ruler of the world ever? Look at Psalm 24. The earth belongs to the Lord and all that's in it, for he founded it upon the waters. That's a creation statement. God's rule is based upon his creative work, says the Psalm. Okay, next slide. We now come to the day-age approach. And here again the claim is that the book of nature, when rightly understood, and the book of Scripture, when rightly understood, will not conflict. And if the book of nature, well understood, indicates an ancient earth and a more ancient cosmos, then perhaps we can read Genesis 1 in a concordism with that scientific understanding. And so the days of Genesis 1 were interpreted by these scholars as potentially great ages each, going down at last to the sixth day when we enter ordinary time with that last day of creation. So the days of Genesis 1 are potentially vast ages of time, and a general concordism was proposed between, say, Big Bang Theory and Genesis 1. Early versions of this were put forth in the 1850s and 60s by good Orthodox theologians like Charles Hodge, who was probably the most famous defender of orthodoxy in North America in the 19th century. Anyone know the name Charles Hodge? Taught at Princeton for like 50 years. Great Orthodox Presbyterian scholar. Hodge favored the day-age view. So there's a progressive creationism going on there and a general concordism. Any pros here? Well, turn to the next slide. Lyell's geology, read by people like Charles Hodge and many theologians, Lyell's geology seemed compelling. Lyell seemed to be reading the book of nature rightly. So does that have impact upon the way we read the book of Scripture? Is it allowed for Christians to use scientific conclusions to guide the interpretation of the Bible? Or should the interpretation of the Bible be entirely divorced from those considerations? If God is the Lord of all the world, these theologians said, then the reading of both books was necessary, the book of nature and the book of Scripture. And so stalwart Orthodox theologians proposed this, and today Wayne Grudem is one of the defenders of this view. Does anyone know the name Grudem? A very important a contemporary theologian and a friend of mine. What about Kant? Can we have ages 1 and 2 with Earth existing and no sun? What about day 3, the day of green plants? What's the day for the sun? What day? Day 4. Yeah. So we have 3 ages without a sun? Well, Hodge said, if you were an earthly observer, the earth may have been shrouded in mist, and only on the 4th day did it come out of the mist. So you missed it on days 1 through 3. It was there, but you missed it. Okay? So on day 4, at last it's shown to the earthly observer. That was Hodge's answer. Grudem's answer is more subtle. What if we take the Hebrew verb about God speaking, and God said, let there be lights? What if we make it a past perfect verb in English, which is permissible grammatically in the Hebrew? What's a past perfect? And God had said. Simple past, God said. Past perfect, God had said. That is, in some prior time unspecified, God had said, let there be lights. We report the speaking on day 4, but the actual speech took place earlier in an undisclosed time. That's Grudem's more subtle answer. I kind of like it. I'm not a day ager, but I kind of like his answer. It's, I'll say it's shrewd. It's shrewd. Okay. But Kahn, does the day age concede too much to the Darwinians? Are day agers kind of on the verge of becoming evolutionists? Or have they conceded too much? That's often the claim made by critics of the day age view. How much time do I have? I actually have 5 minutes over. Oh my. Let me do 5 minutes more, and then we'll do Q&A. Okay, will that work? Because we're scheduled till 9 o'clock, I think. Okay, so 5 more minutes. I'm going to skip the creation of the land of Israel because it's the oddest of all the views. So let's skip 2 or 3 slides and go to literary framework.